one.
It's me, Mary.
Is your camera on, Mary?
Yeah, so I'll just keep fooling with it. I don't know what's the matter, but I'm here.
Hi,
Okay.
Mary. And okay. So just lost my agenda. Here we are. I'm going to call to order the FY22 budget workshop at 9 o'clock at this time. I would ask that those who so choose stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So this is our budget workshop. We have a different format. I have a feeling it is going to be a new and improved format, certainly time-wise, with any luck. Excuse me. So Brooke, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Brooke very shortly, but you have the agenda. The budget overview will include the executive summary, this presentation of revenues and assessments, and then the budget drivers. What I would ask everyone to do, please, is to record your questions as we go along and save them for the end. So if Brooke and Pat can go through the presentation, everyone will have an opportunity to ask all of their questions. But I think for efficiency of time, I would like to proceed in that manner if there are no objections. Alita has an objection.
I don't. Looks like there's a member of the Lancaster FinCom in the waiting room.
Yes, Mr. Trussell was appointed by the Lancaster FinCom to serve as a liaison to our Budget and Warrant Committee. He attended the Budget and Warrant Committee earlier in the week, and he understands that this is our budget workshop. He is an observer. I did send out some misinformation. Unfortunately, I thought we were going to be, wait, is Nikki live streaming us?
We are live streaming us, yes.
Yay, so I didn't give out misinformation. But we have, since he was appointed by the FinCom and is the liaison, we thought it would be fine. I'm not aware the extent to which Stowe or Bolton has appointed a liaison, but if that's the case, then certainly we would welcome them to Budget and Warrant Committee meetings. A reminder also that on March 3rd, we have our public hearing for the budget, which is a budget forum. And so members of the public will be invited and will be able to participate. So that's upcoming.
So I can admit him?
Yes, please do.
Kathy, this is Rich. May I ask
Yes.
you a question?
Yes.
Did you say that Mr. Trussell is a liaison to the Budget and Warrant Committee?
He was to the school committee.
Oh,
Yes, I'm
liaison.
sorry, but he asked to attend. I'm sorry.
no, I get it. Thanks.
Okay.
I was confused.
So, all right.
A question, were we going to ask Alita to delete or to stop the use of chat?
We certainly can.
I think we asked if that was possible last time, because it gets to be very,
It can be distracting, yeah. So we can ask her to stop it, but since it's just usins, I would respectfully request that we not use chat. Hi, Mary, there's Mary. Good morning.
morning, Michael. Michael is here with us too. I see him now.
Oh, Mike's been here.
Oh, I didn't notice him before. He's wearing
on the
that
demo.
yellow t-shirt.
Right, the yellow one, right.
Hey,
You didn't recognize him without his hat.
Kathy,
Who said Kathy?
that's Rich.
Oh, yes.
One thing we could consider, and this is probably another conversation for another time, is if we use Zoom's webinar subscription, it has a Q&A function. So I ran it like an entire authors festival over 2 weeks using that. and it works well if we decide we want to do that. You can manage it. You can delete the questions that are inflammatory. They don't all appear, stuff like that. So we can talk about that later.
Thank you. Okay, all right. So the last thing I remember saying was, if there are no objections, then we will proceed in the way that I described, that being that Brooke and Pat will do a presentation. And then after their presentation, folks can ask all their questions. So the last thing I said, if there are no objections, and then Alita threw me a curveball because I thought she was objecting. Okay, I see none. Okay, so make sure you write your questions down. If they're specific to the sections will be executive summary, and then you have your books so you know what specific lines and those things. Okay, so at this point, I will turn it over to Brooke and to Pat. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Thank you everyone for being with us this Saturday morning, this early Saturday morning, whether you're in Stowe, Bolton, Lancaster, or Maine. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy lives to spend with us. I want to thank my own staff. Joan, thank you. Todd, Michelle, and Pat, who just continue to do yeoman's work on all of this. So thank you to everyone. So the three bulleted items that we've got there, we're going to kind of interweave all of those but we wanted to show very specifically that these were like three separate buckets, but we'll be tying them all together as we go through the presentation. And I think a couple of things too, you may not think of all your questions today, and that's okay. Just send us the questions. Feel free to send them through Kathy, of course, and then to us, or send them to me and CC Kathy, and we will continue to respond to any questions that you have as we move towards the adoption of the budget. Want to do just a little bit of a tee up here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Pat, who's going to start to go through the slide deck with you first to give you an idea of the types of drivers and some of the things that we were kind of up against. And then we'll start to go through the executive summary, and we won't go through it line by line because you can read as easily as we can. So it makes sense that we just kind of jump on some of the highlights there. This year was very different, so I just want to kind of highlight a couple of quick philosophical things behind this year's budget. And the first was, normally we start our process, which we did this year as well, by sending things out to the principals and taking a look at the wish list, etc. And we just knew early on that, you know what, we can't do that this year. This has to be a very different approach. And so about, I would say maybe late December, Pat, mid to late December, we decided that we needed to turn course, and rather than kind of work in the process that we had, we decided that, you know what, that wasn't going to be the appropriate manner for creating this year's budget. So we decided that we would work with a level services budget. And that level services budget, the thinking behind that was that it would be level services to the services that you agreed to last year prior to COVID. So I want to be really clear that that was the approach that we took. We also level funded several lines in there. So if they look a lot like they're the same to last year, it's because we deliberately chose to level fund some lines. But of course, the teacher's matrix, so it determines most of our budget. It's about 80% of our budget. So there's not a lot of wiggle room there. You've got matrix with steps and lanes in there. This is a negotiation year. We don't know where we're going to go with our negotiations this year, whether we're going to just look at another 1-year extension, or whether the union will want to go full-fledged for a 3-year CBA. So we're kind of sitting on that tightly. The other thing that we would put into consideration is we feel that we're at a standstill with this budget. And remember that this budget is a snapshot in time. For example, if House 1 numbers come out on Tuesday, a lot of what you see right now, there will be very definitive changes. For example, we don't know what the minimum contributions are for each community right now. So if you take a look at the one page, for example, where it has the assessments, you'll note that we literally put strike throughs through each of those numbers, because it's all fiction until we get our House 1 numbers. And we're no different than the towns too. The towns also, you put your best educated thinking ahead and try to plan this, but until those numbers come out, you're really stymied. And that's where we are. I think we've worked as hard as we can to get where we are. Moving forward, though, we can't really do anything until those House 1 numbers come out and we know, have a better idea. For those of you that are new to this, House 1 numbers are really just a starting point for us, because it goes through, the budget process will go through several iterations, and sometimes we don't know until June, July, August. This last year it was even later, what our numbers really are going to be from the state. But at least the House numbers give us a flavor of where things are headed. So we feel that once we get those numbers and we plug those numbers into our template, we have a much better view of where we're headed. The other thing I would suggest too is, Steve and I had talked about this early on because, of course, as chair of our FinCom, our subcommittee, we decided that it would not make sense for us to bring forward a budget that's like 12% higher, or as we've done in years past, showing what everybody has asked for, because it just wasn't, it felt a bit of a waste of time in some ways, particularly for this year. So he said, see if you can bring a budget in that's closer to the reality of where we're going to be this year, to be effective with our time and energies. And so that's what we've tried to do. I think the bottom line, Michelle, you may have to correct me on this because I know there was just a tweak here on Thursday. I think we're sitting right now at about 3.79. Is that correct? Thanks. For our total differential between last year and this year, which is really right now on par with what other school districts are bringing in. Now, we don't know what that will ultimately flush out to for our communities until those House 1 numbers come out and we see the local minimum contributions, and then we work from there. So that's kind of a broad overview. I'm going to turn it over to Pat here, and Pat, I'm going to ask you to start to go through the slide deck, and then you'll do that first, and then we'll come back and we're going to start to go through the executive summary.
Okay, Michelle, can you bring that up for me, please? Okay, so I first want to tell you what our priorities have been in the preparation of this budget. The number one thing was to preserve the core of the budget. That would be to keep services as they were last year without the COVID-19 expenditures. Now I'm going to go through definitions of each one of these. Then we, as Brooke mentioned, we have level service versus level funding. And for fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22 offsets, we had a lot of changes. And then we also had member town asks to limit the assessment increase to 2%. Next page,
can I just go back, Pat, for a minute too on some of
Sure.
these? So just again, for our newer members, level service versus level funding is very, very different. So I want to make sure that there's the understanding. Level funding is just the same funds from last year to this year. Services would be different. And again, when we look at services, exactly what I explained with the teacher's salary, there's a contract in place that we need to abide by. So that can't be level funded, but it can be level serviced, and that's what we did. The offsets, Pat will go into a little bit more detail on that, but you need to keep in mind that the lack of offsets that we had this year definitely plays a role, and as we look forward to it as well, because into the next school year, we didn't have rentals, we didn't have gate receipts, we didn't have things that would normally help to offset things, and so I just want to be clear that played a critical role. So I'm sorry, Pat, do you want to go back after the terms now, please?
Sure, and as Brooke mentioned, the level service budget delivering in the upcoming year exactly the same services that were delivered the previous year, as opposed to level funding budget, allocating the same amount of money due to rising costs, which would automatically create a service cuts. So the next item I want to bring forward is, what are the actual drivers coming for this year? Well, salaries for existing personnel, insurance and benefits, as always, transportation, utilities, and reductions and offsets, as previously mentioned by Superintendent Clunchy.
Can I go back to the insurance and such too? Very often insurance and benefits, we don't know what those numbers, those numbers kind of trickle into us from the various organizations over the course, certainly of the next month or two. So we put forward what we suspect or what trending has shown us, and that's where we arrive at those numbers. But, we could be off either too high or too low, but we're never really sure. So insurance, et cetera, probably won't come in for the next month or so.
That's correct. As far as offsets, you can see the discrepancy in between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. And a lot of this is because of, like Brooke had previously mentioned, we don't have the gate receipts that we've had. There's been a reduction in grant funding. Just across the board, all of those revolving type funds have gone down. As far as new personnel, the only thing that we've put forward are 2 FTEs in the special education department, and we'll get into more detail about that when we go through the budget book summaries. In revenue, what to expect? There should be additional Chapter 70 revenue for the full day kindergarten students. I would expect that there would be this year. The only thing that would probably reduce that would be if the wealth factor became a key factor in the reduction. But I don't expect that, and I have questioned people at the Department of Education, and I do not expect a decrease there. Reduction in E&D as a revenue source is also a key component. We're only putting forth $650,000 as a source of revenue for revenue this year.
Now, can I just also go back to that to E&D for a minute?
Sure.
You'll remember that every year that I've been here, we have tried to put back in exactly what we took out, and we've tried so badly to get off the hamster wheel of the E&D as a revenue. Last year, I remember saying, we had to borrow $1 million, and we call it borrowing for the new members. It's just literally utilizing some of the E&D money as a revenue source in your budget to help support the revenue lines there to make your budget work. Last year we borrowed $1 million, but we don't think we're going to be able to put back into, at the end of this current year, nearly $1 million. And I remember saying that was always my concern when we put those kinds of monies in, whether we could actually put that money back in. And so right now we are not expecting that we're going to be able to put that $1 million back in. We'll have some to put back in, but not nearly what we would. So that will impact our E&D line. And I think the other thing, as Pat said, to note is that we do, though, have $650,000 that we're putting in from E&D in the 22 budget.
Now, district debt, this was something that I thought I should put up on the slide. I just wanted people to know that the reduction, the debt is going down at the high school for the high school renovation project that was completed in 2003. And for the high school track, you can see that that debt continues to go down. But again, many years back, it was requested that we use funding from the gate receipts to offset some of the high school track debt. And we've done that, but we've had to reduce it because, again, from the revolving funds, that's the revolving funds are where that the gate receipts are. That's one of the reductions that we had to take. The high school leach field, the oil tank, you can see that debt is in there. That is also reducing. But again, this year we had to put in potential debt for the high school feasibility study, because at some point in time, due to the schedule for the MSBA, we will have to borrow money if, in fact, we are moved forward in this process. And what's next? We're waiting for the final health insurance numbers and liability insurance rates. I'm hoping to get them in the next couple of weeks. We're still waiting for our state revenue assessment numbers. And we're also looking for the H1 numbers, which are due out next week. And the other thing, the outlying factor, and a lot of times we don't even get this information until late March, April, is the grant funding estimates. So we have to kind of estimate what we're going to put, what we think we're going to get based on prior years. And with some of the grants, we can also look at, like in the example of the Title I grant, we can look at, where we're trending in regards to free and reduced students, because that's usually one of the driving factors for that funding. And next. Is that the last slide?
Yes.
Okay. So if you want to put up the workshop book, please.
By the way, Michelle, thank you so much, as always, for all of your work to pull all of these binders together.
I'm going to need to reshare. Yeah, for some reason, nothing is showing up, so I'm going to try to reshare it again.
There you go.
Yep, but this.
Right. The first couple of pages, you see the executive summary, but I'm going to kind of scoot past that for now. And then we can, because that's where all the detail is. And I want to just bring it to the yellow sheet, which is a list of the direct charge of expenditure to revolving and grants.
So there's something wrong with the slide. I'm going to have to restart it because it's not, all the pages are showing blank. So I'm going to close it. And
So, a lot of it was showing up though, Michelle. It was showing up on our screens.
all of it. I had a lot of blank pages on mine.
The executive summary was showing up.
Okay, well, let me try it again. Okay. Are you seeing a blank page here?
Yes.
Okay, that should have something on it. That's the problem. So
Yeah, now I see. Now it is all blank. You're right.
all blank. Okay, I'm going to close it and reopen it. So I'm going to stop sharing again.
I have it up.
I can start talking about this if you want. If you open to the yellow page.
So you want me to share it?
Yeah, see if you can share it because.
I got it.
Okay.
Oh, there's the table.
Yeah, there it is.
Yep, that was not showing on my version. Okay.
So if you can just scroll forward through the executive summary. To the yellow page.
Right there.
Every year we provide this list of direct charge of expenditure to revolving and grants. And as you can see, there's been a significant reduction. But one of the things that was in last year's as opposed to this that I felt the need to mention was that we had the, and if you look, there's blank there isn't a number beside them, is the kindergarten stabilization. So that was a big factor in that as well. But it's still a significant reduction in the grant and revolving offsets. On to the next page. This is the district salary summary. And if you go through all of this, you can see all of the salaries and what the requests were, which they weren't except for special education. You can see what the amount is on each line for each subject at the high school and the teacher lines and the administrators lines.
Can you just go back and just talk about the unspecified district-wide changes? Either you and Michelle can just
Oh,
explain that.
yes, I can
So that
talk
they
about
understand what that is.
So these are some changes that we've made. First of all, there are cuts that we haven't, that have to do with people retiring. And we have cuts that are also, refresh my mind, Michelle,
Well, we have an unspecified cut that we put in there that we know brought us to closer to where we needed to be, but we just
Right,
haven't
of the
identified
other-
that.
Yeah.
right.
And to the school committee members who were here last year, you would see that we've done this for the last several years, and this happens to be where it is right now. Okay, go ahead, Pat.
So on to the next group of pages. And this is specifics on the new staff request as a special ed teacher at the elementary level with language-based focus. And also a special education certified occupational therapy assistant.
And maybe Joan can just speak to those two positions quickly, please.
Good morning. Thanks for allowing me to be here today. I am proposing we hire a special ed teacher to develop a program for students who require intensive academic supports for areas grades 3 through 5. The focus of this program would be able to provide small group instruction where where a teacher can provide intensive, structured, systematic approach to learning. We currently have programs at our middle school and high school that are very similar, so that this would be the kind of adding to what we already have in a comprehensive way. And in this program, we find that we have some students that really require preview and review of concepts, ongoing modeling, discussion and review and reinforcement of taught concepts. And our goal is to remediate reading, writing, and math skills based on students' individual needs. It'll also allow us to provide some small group instruction for science and social studies, because mastering content as you get up in the grade levels is more challenging in terms of vocabulary and skill development. So that's the special ed teacher position. I've also proposed that we hire an occupational therapy assistant. The Lancaster programs have significantly grown this year. We've had several complex learners move into the district, and we're finding that we need more time for service provision and to be able to balance that with evaluation. So we have a model in Bolton where we have an occupational therapy assistant and an OT who can evaluate. So she supervises the position. So I really like that model because the assistant can be full-time providing service provision and get supervision from the master level occupational therapist, but it also allows for more evaluation time. And I really feel like that's needed right now. We have taken, we've had to really split the time between two schools right now, and the schedules are just very filled. So I think this would really be helpful.
Great, thanks, Joan. Pat?
If you could move on to the next slide, the pink page.
We need to keep moving on, please. Keep moving on right through that.
You see the pink.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Just really quick. Can you guys just identify the page number?
Oh, sure.
This is
Like
page
whenever you-
18.
Thank you so
18.
much.
Okay, thank you, Leah.
So here we have a salary and non-salary summary. And basically, it splits it up by salary and non-salary, and then gives you percentage increases by each grouping. And it's by the key departments, insurance, system-wide health insurance, the schools, special ed, teaching and learning. On to the next slide, please. And if you could center it so we can see a little bit more of the, can you move it to the left or the other way? Yeah, okay. So I just want you to note that the assessments on this page are just estimates, and I can explain why when we get to the assessment page. But I've put in conservative estimates for Chapter 70 money, regional transportation, Medicaid revenue and investment income. And then you'll see the 650,000 that I have as a revenue source from E&D. And then charter school assessment, and then other revenue is typically, that's usually what I budget, and it comes in around that anyway. The next page, please. And we have the 5-year rolling enrollments. This is based on our October 1 numbers. There seems to be a little bit of a change in some of the areas, but we really won't know what the full impact of any of this is, and again, until we get those House 1 numbers. So on to the next page, please. And this is the preliminary budget assessment. As you can see, we've strucken out all of the minimum local contribution numbers, but basically this is how we come about calculating the assessment for each one of the towns. So we have a percentage from the previous page that's calculated based on the 5-year rolling enrollment, and then the fixed assessment would be your minimum local contribution, then that would be our House 1 numbers. Then your variable assessment would be based on the percentage of the balance above. If you look above, you can see you have the proposed budget, the high school debt, you back that out, you back out the local revenue, total amount assessed, fixed assessment, and the variable assessment. And that's how we come about with our assessment numbers. And the same thing for, in some cases, we've had some, it was like there was debt, SBAB credits for, I believe it was the Hale School that used to come through for the town of Stowe. And that's what that net payment analysis would show, because we would receive the funding for the SBA credit, which is for a building, and we would have to pass on that revenue as a reduction of an assessment. Next page. So here is the budget driver page. As you can see, the key areas again are the salaries for existing personnel, insurance and benefits. We have some areas where there are reductions, and that would be in special education. We have an increase in regular day transportation. That's to be expected, because when you take an option year, there's most likely an increase. But overall, if you look below the other system-wide operating expenses, there is a significant reduction. On to the next page. So again, to reiterate, property and casualty, workers' comp estimates, they're estimated at 7.5% right now. And we also have a reduction in offsets from prior years. And there's a couple of factors that I usually use school choice as an offset to health insurance, and that would be one of the biggest reductions. Transportation, it's the final year of our contract with D-Bus. Next year, I don't know what to expect. I would expect rates, I mean, going into 23, I would expect rates to be even higher, but right now I think this was the best route to go. And the special education school choice and charter school estimates are based on what the state's put out there so far. When they come up with some better cherry sheet numbers, cherry sheets being, you know, a closer estimate based on what the governor's going to put forward, then I will, you know, hopefully we'll get some of those numbers before we have to vote the final budget, and I will adjust these, but this is what we have to work with so far. And then the debt services is a list of what we have for debt. Next page, please. In facilities, there's increases in general repairs and building supplies due to HVAC and filter replacements. As Rob Frieswick has mentioned in the past, there are more supplies, cleaning supplies and things like that that have to be purchased, and you know, filters have to be changed more often, and you know, that's generally what the biggest costs in his budget are. Increases in heating and fuel. We're basing this on 19 usage because last year's usage wasn't anything that we could really compare to because we didn't have anybody in the buildings for quite a few months. And the other thing that people need to take into consideration is that a lot of times, even in the wintertime, we're having to crack the windows a little bit to increase the amount of fresh air in the classrooms, which increases our energy costs. And just to add to that, we have a reduction in offsets in that area as well because we're not renting the buildings. There are increases in inspections and compliance. We have a major repair that needs to be for the fire suppression pump system at both the Sawyer School and at the high school. Next page, please. Teaching and learning. There's an increase in instructional software, and that's because we have new instructional tools because of the way we're teaching now in remote and the hybrid. For technology, contracted services have increased due to increases in bandwidth, again, because of the way we're having to teach now. Computer supplies are based on the student cost because we have more kids that have devices in their hands. In their hardware, we also have an offset from E-rate. We continue to get E-rate funding. So some of these hardware, some of the hardware is offset by $50,000. Software and site licensing increases are due to just the license increase in cost and initiatives for learning that are put forward for fiscal year 22. At the high school, you'll see that the contracted service line is increased because of the challenge day and the panorama. And also the EMT program has that line that we used to have in the health services budget has been moved to the high school because that's where it should be.
And so that's just a housekeeping item.
It's a housekeeping issue, right? We see some new textbooks needed for studio arts. And I believe that it may also be some software as well. It's kind of a hybrid. Physical education, there's RADS recertification costs going on. And science replacement books are needed for AP chemistry. At Luther Burbank, there's an increase in instructional technology, again, due to the learning, the type of learning that's going on in the district now. And next page.
That's it, I think.
That's it. Okay,
Yeah.
that's it.
So we can go through the executive summary.
So are you finished with your presentation?
No, we're going to start to just quickly go through the executive summary now. So we'll go back to the actual sheets.
Okay, so you're talking about starting with page.
Right behind the
1.
blue tab, right, where, and it
Yes.
says, so it's basically page 1, and we're just going to go through and highlight a couple of quick things on there, and
Okay.
then open it up for questions.
Okay.
And so as Alita, as you're putting that up, I'm just gonna speak about one other quick thing here. Right now, we are planning to be full return in September. So that's where we're headed, but we understand that we may have to pivot from that because there's still some question as to whether we will all be in full return at that time or not at the state level. So we're just to be clear, this budget is planned as if we were going to be in full return. So I think for this, Pat, you and I can just go through it quickly. Alita, I'm not sure if you can make that a little bit smaller so that we can see the far right columns. I don't know whether that's going to be possible or not. Or actually, I could just move my screen now that I'm thinking of that. There. So I think we just want to highlight a couple of things and do be cautious. And again, this is probably for our newer school committee members. When you see changes, percentage changes there on the side, you know, I think there's one column there where it shows like 233% change, but it's like, I don't know, $200 or $300 or a couple $1,000. So the change, be cautious when you take a look at the percentage change because it might not really tell the story. So Pat, I'm just going to go through one or two quick things here,
Okay.
and then you can jump in if I've missed anything. So where you see the bigger changes there on the right hand side is where we typically always see the bigger changes, and that's in the health insurance for active employees and retirees, whether it's dental or health. You see the kindergarten stabilization fund that's basically been zeroed out on that first page. As well. Do you want to just scroll through? I'm going to go through this kind of quickly and then we can open up for questions. Yeah, I think that's it for that page. Alita, if we can go to the next page, please. Thanks. There you see the new high school feasibility line that we've put in there. There's the EMT move in the second section under health, and you'll see that show up in the high school, which is really where it belongs. The temporary help, Pat, do you want to speak to that section under facilities, please? Where
well, there's been a shift a few years back. Just to give you some historical background, we evaluated the program and made sure that we had the staff, that the buildings were staffed adequately. And now what we're finding is that we bring on some temporary people to fill in some gaps here and there. And it seems that that number has been trending. So
it's just kind of a reminder to school committee that we did a lot of tweaks. I think it was really my first year here. And so now we're just kind of fine tuning that number. You want to keep going and pushing through, Alita, please? Yeah, I don't see anything here. When we say textbook adoption too, that doesn't necessarily mean, like I was thinking about the art and the science that's in there, that doesn't necessarily mean hard copy textbooks. So I just want to put that out there as well, that sometimes it's linked back to hardware and software. We'll push through, Alita, thanks. The computer supply line, and again, that's really just as a result that's up, and that's really just as a result of where we find ourselves this year and pushing forward. I would let you know too, our IT, director of IT always gives us 3 budgets. kind of like the notion of the beer, wine, and champagne type thing. And he really got the beer one is what's in here. This is the lowest end of the three budgets that he brought to us. We started off with his middle one in there, and then we just couldn't do it. So I don't think that there's a lot of cuts that we can make in technology right now. Obviously, athletics is down. Keep going through them, please. Thanks. Pat, do you want to speak to the contract? I think it's a contracted services line that's up there.
Yes, and that would be the two new programs that I mentioned that are happening.
The Panorama and
to the
challenge.
I just read them off the other paper.
Yeah, and the challenge day.
Challenge day, that's the other. Right.
And then you'll see where the EMT has been moved to. It's sitting right there.
And that's also in there.
Yeah. So Lita, if you can keep pushing through, please. I also want to say too, until like some of these supplies that are in here, for example, like the textbooks and such, may not be able to stay in there. So please keep in mind that some of the things that are in here today may not necessarily be in here a week from today, because depending on those house numbers, if we have to go back in and continue to cut, we'll be coming into lines just like this to start to pick away at to get our numbers to where we think they should be. There's not a lot in here, to be honest with you. This is just, it's kind of shifts one way or the other. There are no big asks in any of our buildings this year, including the high school. Just take a quick peek through there. And I know that you got it ahead of time, so you can take a look at that. See, there's an example where it's 100% increase, but it's only $1,000 in the social studies line. Yeah, you can keep going right through there onto the next page then.
And I might want to add too that a lot of these things, they're purchased in a cycle. Textbooks. So when things change and it's, it's pertinent that they receive the newer version, that's when they do it. So you might not see an increase in that line for 2 years, and then all of a sudden, boom, they had to purchase replenishment or the newer version.
Renewal usually.
Something I'd want to stress too is the fact that we don't do this budget in isolation. Like it's not a case of Pat and I sitting together doing this. The principals are all heavily, as they have always been, all heavily involved, as is all of our directors of each of our units, whether it's SPED, HR, business, facilities, everybody's fingerprints are on this budget by the time it comes to you. You can just keep scrolling through. I don't think there's anything of note here either. No, there isn't. Yeah, there's really nothing of note in our schools. Again, you got to keep in mind that 80% of our budget is staff. So the schools really don't have a lot of money, comparatively speaking, quite frankly. Yeah, you can keep going right through that. And there's your last bit. Pat, can you just walk through the bottom matrix there where it starts operating budget, and just, again, for our new members, just kind of talk that through, please?
Right, and at the bottom, you can see that our operating budget has a 3.83% increase. But if you look at the capital, there was no increase in capital leases, and the debt service, it's a little bit different. There's actually, I think that percentage might be wrong there.
We can do a quick check to make sure. And I guess the other thing I would want to stress too is that keep in mind that we're working on this daily. And so, there could be things that we're still going to want to go back and make some changes on, or still some numbers that we'll do a final check on before your final your final draft comes to you. Remember that this is really our starting point in working through the budget with you as a school committee, and that, you know, your meetings going forward, we generally give you an update at each meeting going forward of where we're at with our numbers. I don't suspect that we're going to see huge changes right now because we're pretty close to where we need to land right now. And I would say that, Kathy, is just the broad stroke overview of where we're at right now. So Alita, if you want to stop sharing the screen so that we can just kind of, so that Kathy can see everybody. And we'll
I've got everybody up on the screen. What I'd like to propose how we proceed with questions. What I'd like to do is start with the executive summary from pages 1 through 4 and get a sense of who has questions. I'll note who has questions, and then I will allow one question at a time till we get through everybody's questions, and then keep going. If you have like 3, then I'll come back to you. The next area that I would move to once we've exhausted our questions about pages 1 through 4 would be relative to revenue, pages 19 to 21. And then relative to budget drivers on the last page, starting on page 22. So at this point, if you have a question, now the high school starts on page 4. We'll do the specific buildings last, if that's okay. We'll come back to those after questions about the budget drivers. So anyone who has questions relative to the executive summary, pages 1 through 4, just raise your hand and I'll make a note. So Amy and Mike. Elaine, you're making a face, just raise your hand. Okay.
I don't know which pages my questions specifically refer to. That's why.
Okay, Joseph. All right, so let me go through everybody on this front one and we'll see if we'll work it out. Other questions? Oh, I see you, Leah. I see you. Other questions, pages 1 through 4. Okay, so Amy, you can ask your first question.
Thank you. I'm a little intimidated by going first, but
I can start with Leah. I can, because I don't have questions, but you want me to start with Leah?
Sure. Thank you very much.
Leah, are you intimidated by going first?
No,
I didn't think so.
it's kind of my character flaw that I'm not.
All right, ask your first question.
All right, so I think I have like 4, but I'll ask my most important one, I think.
Okay.
And that
I'll
is
come back to you after everybody gets a turn, okay?
okay. So they're all clarifying, and so I don't know that I need a ton of like a dissertation on this, but I'm just wondering, do you guys see that class sizes are going to be so stable next year that new staff is unnecessary, or do you see the potential for class sizes growing?
Growing from what's current right now? You mean in terms of the hybrid model?
Oh, so no.
That's really what you have to think about, right? Is how we're operating right now. And that's why, that's a great question, Leah, to be honest with you. I think that right now we are really hoping and planning for full return. So that would be your regular class sizes. But we are not naive to know that we may not be at full return next year. We want to be, we're planning to be, but if we have to make changes, we understand that. In terms of larger class sizes than we've had previously, we're not expecting that right now. And I'm not sure if this is where your question is going, but, you know, for example, we actually had some of this discussion the other day with the town administrators, and we're not seeing in this next school year a large influx of students right now. So I'm not sure if that's what your question is, but that's what each one of them has said, that not to expect a large influx in this next year.
Okay. Mike, your first question?
Yep, thank you. And thank you to, I mean, I can't enumerate specifically, but thank you to everyone who helped put this together. I realize that it's a gargantuan task. So, and it's always put together in such a cogent, consistent, logical way. So thank you. So I have just a couple questions on the executive summary, and I'll just ask my first one just because it's the one that appears first. On page 1 in the system-wide section, and I realize that this is just part of it, districts, but it looks like legal services, if you go back to FY18, we're at around 80K, and then FY20 was more than double that, and yet we voted. So in other words, the trend has been consistently rising, and yet we voted for an amount that was lower. And that looks like it's the second year in a row that we've done that. So I guess my question is, why would we do that? And then where does the extra revenue come from to sort of buttress that number? Should it go up? Should the trend continue? Does that make sense?
Pat, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Well, I think in prior years, we had quite a few legal issues pending, and we do not have them at this point. A lot of those have been resolved. So, we have a pretty good idea. We have common things that we constantly need legal advice on. And I sort of took a look at those and said, okay, well, this is kind of the common stuff. And then we have to kind of plan for the unexpected. And then, so we trended in that area. I still think that we'll probably land right there.
I think so too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Joseph?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just clarification, you had said you wanted to limit the questions to the executive summary. The question I had was actually on page 4, but it's under the Nashoba Regional High School budget line item. So do you want me to hold off on that question, or?
That would be great. Yeah, if we could just focus on everything up to that point. Do you have a question relative to the rest of the executive summary up to that point?
I have 2 macro questions. I don't know if they're related to the executive summary. So I'll just hold off at this point, maybe bring it up at the end of the meeting.
Thank you. Amy?
Thank you for letting me gather my thoughts a little bit more. My question is regarding substitute teacher salaries. And I lost the line item now as I was flipping through the executive summary.
On page 3.
That's what I thought. Page 3.
The top.
Yeah, so I guess I see that the number for fiscal year 22 has gone down relative to this year. I'm assuming that's because we had less substitutes willing to substitute. But it's gone up compared to fiscal year 20. And I'm just curious if that's because we've raised the daily rate for substitute teachers, and if not, if that has been something that's been considered to remain competitive with other districts.
Maybe either Pat or Anne Marie can pick that up, that question. Anne Marie?
I haven't heard any discussion about raising the rates. I don't think our rate of pay is really impacting our ability to get the substitutes. I think it goes well beyond that. We're in the middle of the pack. We don't pay the highest, we don't pay the lowest, but we're very competitive. There's a lot of reasons why, especially this year, substitutes are hard to come by, but I don't think it's the dollars.
Yeah, I would agree.
What is our daily rate for substitutes right now? Do you know?
Oh, on Saturdays, I don't put those numbers on my head. Is it 85, I think?
85, that's what it is.
5.
Okay. All right. Okay. Elaine.
So my question is for Joan about the new FTEs or the program, really. I was wondering if the program that you mentioned is going to be a single program where kids from across the district would come to a single building, or if it's something that exists in all 3 buildings, because you were talking about it as an elementary level.
It's going to be one single program in one location.
Okay.
I think Elaine is asking, is it specific though? Is your question, is it specific just to Lancaster students? Is that what your question is, Elaine?
No, I figured it would
Oh,
be
okay.
It's a district-wide.
Or, yeah.
It would be a district-wide program open for students in all 3 towns, similar to the other programs that we have, so we can service kids more comprehensively.
Okay.
Okay. Leah, do you have another question?
Yeah. So let's see here. With regard to the executive summary, it seems like the vast majority of cost increases with the staff, of course, and benefits, which is just a ridiculous increase in percentage, but that's beyond our control, I realize. I wonder, with the staff increases, I know that steps and lanes are driving that, but have you guys also put into that a potential but undisclosed COLA increase?
We always build in a COLA of some sort or another somewhere, but there is not a very large COLA in here.
Okay, thank you.
Steps and lanes are included though.
Mike, did you have another question?
Yeah. My other question was sort of, it was a little bit more abstract, but also sort of related to my first question. And I realize that I'm talking about relatively smaller potatoes, so I apologize. But you know, when we look at earlier in the year, we talked about how our current reality could save us money in some areas, could cost us monies in other areas, and that has it's at the time it was too early to kind of shake that out and really be able to say definitively what it's going to look like. But
are you talking COVID, Mike?
I am talking COVID, but that wasn't my question.
Okay.
I'm just contextualizing. Mm-hmm. So the example that I'm going to give is of all things snow removal, right? So for example, this year we have, like, let's say we have $112,000 allocated for snow removal, and we've had very little need to spend that money, at least thus far. So then what happens to those areas where we've budgeted that money and it ends up that we have, you know, this extra leftover money? How does that get rechanneled in the budget?
That's exactly where you get the E&D money from, Mike. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So all of that shoves back into E&D.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Awesome.
And that's our concern, is that we're not going to have $1 million. I'm praying for no more snow between now and April, so that all of that money can go back into E&D, because we have to borrow from it again next year.
I just want to add to that.
Then I'll come back to you, Mike. Go ahead, Pat.
Can I just add to that, please? Yeah. I just want to add one thing to that. It isn't just snow removal. It's sanding.
Right, salting. Yeah.
And then also at the end of the year, removing all that sand that's all piled up in the parking lots.
Yeah. So. I guess, my question wasn't specific to snow removal, obviously,
yeah.
but yeah. Is going back to Brooke's response, is that true with only certain line items, that money gets rechanneled into E&D, or is that true with any line item where there's surplus, it goes right into E&D?
Yeah, all of the surplus money at the end of the year goes there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Amy?
Thank you. I have a few more questions, but I'm going to start with the unspecified district-wide changes.
Mm-hmm.
I was confused about that line item, and I guess what I'm trying to understand is that, like, cuts you need to make from the budget, but you just don't know where they're coming from yet?
That's exactly right. So it's really, it's like a one-stop shop that we're saying, look, in order for us to get to that 3.79, we knew that we have to have at least that much money still cut. Now, for example, Amy, we already know right now that we have 6 retirees that are coming along, but quite frankly, who knows? And especially this year, who knows if others won't say, you know what, I don't want, if we have a really glitchy vaccine rollout and, we end up in, I don't know, a hybrid next year, and somebody says, I just don't want to do this anymore, and they just decide to walk away. And if it's a position that we can cut through natural attrition, then we always do that first. So if for us, it's kind of like a bit of a safety valve that we leave it there. And then if we can cut through natural attrition before we go in to make additional cuts, that's always what we do.
Okay, thank you. Elaine, did you
Rich
have?
also has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a second. Okay, I had started to call on Elaine. Did you have more questions relative to this? And then I saw Rich's hand up.
I just had one more, but Rich can go ahead first. That's fine.
Okay, Rich.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment and a question, I guess. Or I guess it's just a confirmation. So first of all, I find it ironic that our Canadian superintendent is wishing for less snow for the rest of the year. But anyway, so just building on Mike's question regarding surplus funds flowing to E&D, which makes perfect sense to me. You know, that really, I think, speaks to the accuracy of the budgeting. Would you say so? You know, in some ways, you're a victim of your own excellence in the sense that you've estimated revenues accurately and your expenses pretty accurately, and therefore the E&D, as far as I know, hasn't exceeded the 5% that is regarded, you know, statutorily, that's the limit statutorily required. So I just wanted to point that out. If my conclusion is right, I think that's what that reflects. Would you concur?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think in past years, I think we've done a really good job of that because we've come in on our budget amount every single year that I've been here, from where we started to where we've ended. But we've said, you know, all the way along, you know, I know that we've taken heat at times for that E&D, and I will tell you this year, I'm so glad that E&D was where it is because of this year, because you don't see some of the stuff coming like COVID. So I feel that we've done a really good job of managing that. I would also tell you too, Rich, and I know that the school committee knows this, but we generally freeze the budget in about early March. And so that we have a flavor of exactly what we've got left to pay bills, and we can start to really understand any funds that will potentially go back into E&D. Like, we have a flavor right now of what we think, but we don't really know until that March time period.
Thank you.
Elaine?
Oh.
Can I just make a quick follow-up?
Sure.
Just real brief. So in an ideal world, you'd have 3 to 5% in that fund, and you just have a little bit going in and out. That's the hamster wheel you're referring to.
That's exactly, yeah. That if in a perfect world, that's exactly where we would be at. That's from my lens. I think that would be the most fiscally healthy. I think that we're fiscally healthy anyway, but that would be perfection. And I just don't know that we're going to get there, but that would be perfection.
Thank you. Elaine?
Thanks. So last year, I remember attending the budget workshop and multiple principals saying their number one key need, I won't call it a wish list because it wasn't pie in the sky. It was like the thing we need the most are counselors. And I'm sure I'm not going to get the exact details right, but I remember like adjustment counselors. I remember some stuff about K-2 or something in that early range. And those things got cut. As far as I understand, those things got cut.
That's right. They did.
It was a tight budget year. We didn't get any of that. This year, it feels like the need for those things would be even greater, considering the challenges that the students have been through this year. Because if that was a need pre-COVID, isn't that an even larger, like gigantic need moving forward? And if we have to do level services and we can't add on anything to that, like how can we possibly make up some of that gap that already existed before COVID? Maybe that's too big. I didn't realize how big of a question that was actually going to sound when I said it, because I was specifically thinking about staffing, but feel free to address that any way you can.
So we're going to start with Todd.
And when we get to the building, the high school particularly, you'll see the purchase of the Panorama software, Elaine. That software was purchased because that is a platform that allows social, emotional, and support, as well as academic support. And Jody Speck over at the high school and John Kroll were instrumental in making sure that, because our high school students we went into full remote, getting that kind of software that allows teachers and counselors to be reaching out to students, surveying students regularly, getting feedback from them. It's a new platform that we're using that we started in September, but in lieu of hiring adjustment counselors and people, this was one platform that we saw as a strong way to stay connected with students, particularly at the high school level, because they weren't coming in. And you'll see that line item. I think Pat went over it when we went through the high school, but I think that was a $10,000 increase. And that's the explanation behind that. So, in a perfect world, if we were full back, having adjustment counselors, more people, et cetera, as well as the addition of the Student Support Center too at the high school was another way in which we were trying to address that this year in a full remote model, particularly 9 through 12. I
think though, Elaine, Todd, thank you so much. That articulates so well, as you always do. I think, Elaine, we're still not sure what we're up against. I think we're almost in a philosophical, let's wait and see what we're up against right now. I think that the purchase of that software was huge for us. And I think the change of the high school that we made with that Student Support Center was huge. So I think we've done some of that wasn't necessarily huge dollars. But we'll see what we're up against in September. We may have to come back and say, what, this is what's happened and here's what we're going to have to do. So I'm not throwing the idea out right now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Leah, did you have any more questions?
My last one is probably around the school resource officer piece, and this is perhaps ingrained in some law somewhere, but can you just explain, I think it's $54,000. Can you explain the cost sharing or which department gives us a police officer? Any insight there?
So I'm going to turn this over to Pat for that level of specificity, but because the high school is in Bolton, that's why it is the Bolton Police Department. And the agreement, the MOU that's in place between the school district and the town of Bolton is that one piece. But having said that, again, if Lisa was here, she would talk to you about the importance of all of our police forces, and we keep them connected to the high school, even though they are not, like, they all have keys to get in, for example, they all have the fobs. So, I mean, the single SRO is Bolton based. But the truth is we keep all of our departments current because, of course, for example, sometimes we have issues, for example, let's say Stowe or Lancaster, we still deal with those police departments, even though that child is at the high school. But the SRO itself is Bolton based. Pat, do you want to add anything on that?
No, we basically reach out to the town of Bolton and they tell us what the cost is for that resource officer every year. And that's what we budget. So as far as, where does that number come from? That is what they bill us.
Okay. All right. So Mike and then Amy. Mike, did you have another question? Okay, thank you. Amy, go ahead.
Thanks. I have larger questions, but it sounds like we're reserving them for like more macro questions for later on. So this is my last question regarding the executive summary. Mm-hmm. The health insurance premiums for active employees has gone up by almost $1 million compared to last year. Mm-hmm. I know that those are, we have no control over them, but do you have any insight as to why this year?
Well, one of the key driving factors is that we've had a lot more people jump onto our health insurance because of the economy. Spouses have lost their jobs, and that's one driving factor. We talked to Maya, who is our insurance provider, and they basically give us an idea of where we're going to land. And that's the number that we use until we get our actuals. So, you know, this could change, this could go up a little bit. You know, they get, you know, usually I put in a number that's not really high because we've been trending our experience, which is, you know, experience in their language is, you know, the number of sick people that we have on our enrollment has been pretty good over the years. And we've tend to, you know, trend downward. So I put in a mediocre number here so that, you know, it's more where we're going to land. So this is just what it is. I mean, we've had quite a few people jump on, and then we have to also anticipate more people jumping on for next year. Because if people still don't go back to work, then, you know, that's just the way it goes.
Thank you. Leah, did you have any more questions about the first 4 pages? Okay. Elaine? Mike? And Amy, you said that was your last one. You had more macro ones coming up. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also you said building specific questions we should reserve for later as well?
Yes, if you don't mind, that would be great. All right. Any other questions that you've thought of for the first 4 pages? Oh, Sharon.
This isn't necessarily a numbers question, more of a philosophical question based on Elaine's question about the need for adjustment counselors. I'm just wondering how the work that's being done on SEL can play into that. So I'm wondering, as teachers learn more or become more adept at the SEL, does that help to provide a more organic way to support students, so that students are kind of getting that support at organic is the best word that I can come up with, level, just on an ongoing basis, so that maybe it decreases the need for that additional.
So that's a great question. I'm going to turn to Todd here in a minute to help respond to this, but I think you're absolutely right. And I don't think that that's the only thing, but I think your point is well taken because we've done a lot of focus on SEL through our PD. And it's certainly coming up again in March. You're going to see, well, I think you got a glimpse of the list at maybe it was the second last meeting, Todd, that you spoke about the workshops. I think that it gives teachers certainly more confidence and more contextual knowledge. But at the end of the day, I still think that there's a place for exactly as Elaine pointed out for some additional supports. So I still think that there's still going to be a need, but I think that your thinking is spot on. But I see it running in parallel, quite frankly. Todd, thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo the same. You know, you did hear me report out in terms of the number of, you know, workshops that we're offering just for that one day in March. We get over 30 of them. And I would say 90% of them are really tied into the SEL component, as well as the equity and inclusion component that we're focused on as well. And so much of that work, Sharon, is just going on behind the scenes. You know, even in this virtual world that we're living in, we're constantly sending people to research for better teaching seminars. We're constantly sending staff to and our administrators to webinars and workshops through the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Mark Brackett, our keynote speaker, who's coming on in March, has been offering a tremendous amount of virtual webinars as well. I know Joan continues to send a ton of her people to workshops. And so much of that is just going on behind the scenes. If you'll remember, we worked 2 years with the S3 Academy and developed plans for our K-8 schools. And those are still in effect, which is why we focused on the panorama this year with the high school, because our S3 Academy work is still in place at our K-8 schools. And that's why we put that focus this year on purchasing that software for the high school so that we could have that continued connection with those students as well. So I think you'll see with the March day that, you know, so much of that work so that teachers can have tools and resources to implement in their classes both in a hybrid model, a remote model, or even a traditional model, has really been a focus. And if you take a look at our district improvement plan, it is goal number 1.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on the first 4 pages? Okay, seeing none, why don't we move over to the revenue pages 19, 20, and 21. Please raise your hand if you have questions about anything on those pages, and I will make note, and then we'll do what we did for the last round. Okay, Rich. I see Mike. Amy and Joseph. Okay. So, Rich, Mike, Amy, and Joseph. Anyone else? I'll check back when we finish with their questions. We'll do the same thing. If you have several questions, we'll just do one at a time and go through. Okay, so Rich.
Mine is a more general question, but specific to this data. I know in STOW, there's a budget format they go through, and that those numbers roll up, and those are reported to the state, right? And I can go on to the state Department of Local Services and pull down that data.
Mm-hmm.
Which of these tables is this formatted in that way? Sort of like a standard format, like this is the way you're supposed to present it? Or is this more like how you feel like, it's a more consumable way for us to consume it? You follow what I mean?
I would say, if I'll answer this question, I would say that it's a more palatable format. The executive summary, each line, if you look at each line, there's an account number that has specific links to the DESI general ledger accounts. So
it does follow the DESI process or the template, so to speak.
Right, but as far as the summary pages and everything, they don't follow necessarily.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike.
Pat, I'm sorry. You already explained this, and I was tuned in. I promised myself I would do my best to understand, but I didn't quite get it. I know that there's a quick answer to this, but the SBA reimbursement dropped off a cliff after FY20. Can you just remind me again why they were?
Oh, sure.
And then they dropped off.
Right. The old program of school building used to issue payments over a period of years for the reimbursement of a construction project. But one of the things that they do is they would provide the payment of that directly to the school district, not to the town. Even though the town, did the borrowing and everything, they would issue the funding to the school district. So we would get that money, and we know what we're going to get every year. We just automatically deduct it from their assessment because we've already received that money.
So this is for the center school?
This would have been for the Hale School.
Hale School.
But now there's a different program. They do it totally different now.
Okay.
So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I feel better.
Amy?
Yes, my question is regarding now that I'm reading it, maybe I'm going to answer my own question, but these are revenues by sources. So I was wondering why we're not showing any revenue for full day kindergarten in fiscal year 22, but now I see that the value that's listed for fiscal year 21 was coming from E&D, not from kindergarten students. Is that right?
Good question.
Okay.
We, in fiscal year 21, we are in the, what we call the gap year. So we stopped the full day kindergarten tuition program. So this year, kids are not paying a tuition to be in full day kindergarten. So, and that would be our gap year, because that means we're not getting any funding from the families and we're not getting any funding from the state. So going forward, we will get funding through our Chapter 70 money for full day kindergarten, because we'll have the other half of the day for the kids, so they won't be at a
it won't be
0.5.
identified anymore, Amy, as K money, because it's just going to be general Chapter 70 money moving forward.
Joseph?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have a question, and I just want to preface it by a comment by saying that in the month of December and in January, myself and my 3 esteemed colleagues from Lancaster have had a couple of talkings to by our Finance Committee and our Select Board. So when this budget presentation was started, there was a slide that was put up that talked about the member town asks at 2%. Now, relating back to these talkings to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, because you were there, and Mr. Rubenstein as well. I thought I heard from our town administrator in Lancaster that the 2% was the Bolton number, and that it was left, in my mind at least, that Lancaster had not made any request or representation into what they were actually seeking at this point. So I was wondering if I can get a clarification on this 2% figure.
So you're absolutely right, Joseph. I think that for Lancaster, when the number of the 2% was put out, I think Orlando's kind of response to that was, well, yeah, we kind of like to keep it in that zone too. But you're absolutely right. I mean, did he come forward and say it should be, well, we can handle this number, that number? You're absolutely right that didn't happen. And Stowe, because Stowe always has benefited in the last several years, certainly the 5 years I've been here, Stowe has always benefited from whatever that number is. So that's why they didn't even bother putting a number forward, because it doesn't matter to them right now, because really the number will be, driven more by whatever it is that we do with Lancaster and Bolton.
Thank
Other
you.
questions?
Pat, did Brooke want to make a comment?
No.
Okay, so I'm trying to look at where I have. Okay, back to you, Rich. You have another question?
Yeah, so I was curious about the charter school line on page 19.
Mhm.
I'm just totally ignorant about what that's about.
That actually will come to us, Pat, for just to refresh my memory, that will come through to us on the cherry sheet as well, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And that number can vary year to year. The first couple of years that a student is enrolled in a charter school, they give us money to help the loss of the revenue at the other end. And then eventually it drops off. So, and basically, I mean, if it held steady and the same kids went, say 5 kids went and they went 5 years in a row, eventually we wouldn't get any revenue. But it's fluid. There are constantly new kids going in, some kids coming back. So it's a very fluid number.
But it's on a number that we determine, Rich, is the point. It comes to us from the state.
Right.
Okay, so it's replacement revenue. So, you have a fixed cost, and if some of that revenue leaves the system, your costs don't really change.
Right.
So they're looking to offset that, so it's not a shock to the budget.
Exactly.
Okay.
If there are no objections, I'd like to call on.
I think Steve has a question.
Steve, yes, who hasn't had a question yet, and then I'll go back to Mike Koresh. Is that okay, Mike?
Sorry, no, I don't have any more questions in this area, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I really don't have a question, but I would like to further explain the question that came up about the kindergarten. When we stopped collecting tuition for kindergarten, the problem is that the state reimburses a year back. So we had to create a a fund to carry us through that year where we wouldn't be collecting tuition and we wouldn't be getting reimbursed by the state. So that's happened
Yes.
already. So
Thank
now
you for
we can
clarifying.
look forward. Now we can look forward to being, unfortunately, on a 1-year lag, being reimbursed for the kindergarten tuitions that we don't collect anymore. Okay?
Thank you. Amy, another question?
I guess I'm just trying to make sense of the proposed assessment numbers and how they relate to the percentages. I just did some quick math.
When I went through this slide, I made it a point to say that these assessments they're just estimates because they flow through the document. So they're actually fictitious at this point until we have all of our H1 numbers and the remaining final numbers on our revenue from the state.
So please don't carry a lot of stock in those numbers right now, Amy, because they're just plug numbers for us right now until H1.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. 3, 4, Joseph. You're muted. Still muted.
You can see I'm having real trouble with the mute this morning. Thank you, Madam Chairman, again. And a very simple question, and it's through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Maroney. We keep talking about the H1 budget, the H1 numbers. Are we sure we're getting those next week?
That's a great question. Typically, would it be correct, Pat, to say typically we get them in the last week of January, but you know, it's such a bizarre year. We're counting on that. Yeah. But I don't think that there's anything in stone on that. So that's a great question. I don't know, Pat, whether your source.
I haven't heard anything that we weren't going to get them.
Yeah.
So
it's just
I'm sorry,
that we typically do.
You haven't heard anything
No.
Okay.
I haven't heard anything.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Leah.
Guys, I think I asked this last year too, and forgive me if this is a stupid question, but I'm looking at page 22, the budget driver.
We're going to get to that. Can you hang on for a minute?
Absolutely.
And then you be first. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, let me just check. Any more questions about revenue, pages 19, 20, 21? Seeing none, we'll move over to the drivers. So we know that Leah has a question. Other people who have questions about the budget drivers, please raise your hand. All right. Anyone else? I'll check back in a sec. Okay, Leah, go. And then Amy.
Okay, so not so much about the drivers, but about the box above that shows last year's budget and then the proposed budget. It seems to me that you have a percentage increase of 3.66. Forgive my
what page, Leah?
bad eyes. Page 22.
Okay, thank you.
You know what, Michelle, that percentage, I don't think it carried forward.
Yeah,
when you
I
made
just
the other
noticed that
changes.
too. Yeah, that was a great catch. I'm not sure if that's where Leah was heading, but we made a change, I think, was it Thursday afternoon or Thursday morning, Michelle? And it looks like that change didn't carry through to that percentage. So that percentage is off. It should be 3.79, right?
Yeah, 3.79.
In the actual document, it is 379. However, I just failed to make additional copies of all of those backup pages. So, you know, those are just the initial pages. I made photocopies to redo the books for that executive summary, but didn't make all of the copies for the other backup pages. So
Got it. So I did not, that is not what I caught. So
That's what I caught.
I did not know that. You know, like 3.8, 3.79, whatever it is, it feels like it's higher than the 2% you were just talking about. So
because it
those
is.
two, so we, you know, even with this level services budget that is totally bare bones, we still have to cut 1.8%.
Well, I do, again, don't hold us to that, because it really goes back to Amy's earlier question about the assessments. Until we see what the town assessments are, and that was like what I was suggesting in an email the other day. I think I sent it to everybody, but I can't remember. You know, like for example, like last year, Bolton's assessment, I want to say was about $250,000 higher than the year before. Well, that makes a difference for us. And then when you take a look at a percentage on top of that, then it might not be as many cuts for us to make. So that's why we're at a standstill until we have a flavor of H1. And again, not saying that, I really want to be clear that H1 numbers are the be all and end all. It just gives us a much more solid footing to operate from. But we know that H1 numbers aren't necessarily where the state is going to land, but it gives us a much better idea than where we're at right now, which is why those assessment numbers are really just plug numbers for us right now.
Okay, so just to clarify my concern, even if Bolton's assessment was to increase by $250,000 or something like that, and like you have $500,000 more in the assessments, it feels to me like we are still way over budget with this level services proposal. And so my point is, and this can just like float out into the ether for anybody listening or watching, is that for our towns to establish a percentage above which they're not willing to go, that then forces us to cut services. And so I need the public to understand that when class sizes go up, it's because we were told we can't spend above X. Would you say that that's accurate?
I think that that's somewhat to mostly accurate. I don't think that the towns, and I don't want to speak for our town administrators, but I don't think that they ever think that they're coming and saying to us, you have to do this or else. I never feel that. I feel that they give us a flavor to say, listen, this is about what the appetite is for us for this year, knowing what their own priorities are and their own communities' appetite for things like a major dump truck or an ambulance or what, because that's all part of this, right? For them, it's out of our world, but it's a huge part of their world, and we understand that. But I would say, I'm going to kind of spring from your thinking and say that my concern, and I know that I've said this to several of you, is I don't know if I can back us into that 2% this time. I don't know if we can physically do it. And I really won't know until those house numbers come out and see, to your point exactly, Leah, what is the real differential or closer to reality differential going to be. So your point is spot on, but I don't ever feel like you have to do this or else. I don't feel that. But I also am not naive to think that if any community says to us, you know, can you do a 2% or a 3%, and we come in at 5%, I don't know whether it'll pass in that town. And that's the other thing, is you don't want to ever leave us in a position. I don't want to leave us in a position that where the budget just fails in all 3 communities. So it's a toggle for sure, but I am worried this year that I don't know if we can do the 2%. I am worried, and I say that out there to the public as well.
Amy, did you have any more questions?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on this topic if I could, just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because, you know, I went to Mr. Rubenstein's budget primer, which was super helpful. And what I got out of that was that this 3.79% budget increase is not the same as the percentage increase that each town is going to see over their.
That's exactly right.
Their portion of the school's budget. And their portion of the school's budget is dependent on other factors, including the state's contribution.
What the state tells them their minimum contribution is.
Right.
You're
which
right.
will offset their portion of what the school, the budget that they pay to the school is. I mean, it's not as simple as saying, well, the overall school budget is increasing by 3.79%. And that means that each town's portion is being asked to increase by 3.79%.
No, it doesn't. That's exactly right, Amy.
And it's more that the overall budget is increasing by that percentage. Then you take the total budget and you divide it among the towns based on enrollment, and then that number gets divvied up based on the state's contribution, and then you finally get to how much the town's portion of the school's budget is going to increase, and that's that 2% number that we're talking about. That
Yes.
thrown in, right?
You did a really,
Yes.
really nice job of articulating that, Amy.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's spot on.
So I guess what I'm saying is like, I just don't want us to get confused about the percentages.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Confusing as a new member, and I wanted to make sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, they're two very different things, the budget increase and the assessment increase.
Thanks. Rich, did you have a question?
Yeah, I thought, I could be splitting hairs here, but I was just wanted to be clear about the 2% number that came from Bolton. Can you just share who that came from, like which board? And
It didn't come from a board. Well, maybe it came from a board and I just wouldn't know it, Rich. But in all fairness, our TAs generally meet with me in December and give me a flavor then, because that's when we're working on our budget. That's when we start our really deep work on the budget. And at that point in time, they give me a flavor then as to what they think their communities can handle. And so that's when, the 2% was floated.
Okay. Any more questions about budget drivers? Amy, go ahead.
I do have a question. I just don't know when I have two questions. I'm going to ask one of them now because I think it pertains to this discussion. Brooke, you mentioned that you are planning for a full return for our students next year, which is
in a perfect world.
Absolutely. I understand there are many factors out of your control. And I guess one thing that I have been wondering is if the world is not perfect in September and we are told that we need to offer a fully remote option, as well as a full return option,
Which wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. So I'm wondering how that impacts, what impact that would have on the proposed budget.
I think it's too soon to tell, and it would be foolhardy for me to paint a vision right now, because it's just too, Amy, it's just too soon, and there are just way too many factors that are at play here. I mean, for example, just simplistically, until that bus guidance changes, that's huge. Just and Michelle's sitting right here, and she's the one that deals with this and does all of this. That's just beyond enormous. So there are things like that and if we, for example, if those guidance if that guidance didn't change, then we're back to the notion of 3 buses per single route. Now, we can't do that because I don't think we'll have enough buses available to us if we have full return. But then you'd say, well, probably not all the kids would come back. So we would have maybe 2 buses. So I'm saying just the busing alone, never mind the educational component, it's going to be really multi-layered. So I wouldn't want to speculate on it right now because it's really complex. And I think there are going to have to be a lot of things that go into play. I see this upcoming summer as being almost similar to last summer, where we're all working straight through trying to plan and see what the next year is going to look like, because we'll have a better idea then. Because I do think that some of those things may fall off. I do think that they'll probably make changes to the guidance of the busing, but until some of those things are changed, it would be foolhardy for us because it would be a lot of work expended unnecessarily.
Thank you. So I'd like to move on to the schools. And if you have questions specific to the high school, we'll go school by school. Please raise your hand. I have to change pads. Okay, so high school. Amy, did I see your hand, Joe? Yep. Anyone else? Questions specific to the high school? Okay, Joseph, why don't you go first? Questions?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think Ms. Viverito stole a little bit of my thunder earlier in this presentation, but I did want to go back to the school resource officer. And I just wondering if the superintendent could tell us, since the high school has been remote for the entire year, what did the district receive for the $58,000 plus that we're paying to the town of Bolton for those services?
So that, first of all, that's a great idea. That's a great question. Obviously, we don't need somebody in there full time right now, clearly. With that said, though, Joseph, there have been other issues that are still specific to the high school that we've had to involve our SRO with this year. So I wouldn't want you to think that that she's done absolutely nothing for the high school, because that's not the case. We've had other issues, that more mental health issues, more domestic issues, more of those kinds of things that we're involved in, that are outside of, but still intertwined with our work. So I wouldn't say that she's done absolutely nothing all year. I think that she's been busy, but just maybe not as busy on campus as she's been in previous years.
Amy, and then Steve. Question about the high school?
Yes, I do. Thank you. We all know we're undergoing a search for a new high school principal. I noticed that the administrative salary listed for the high school has increased. I'm wondering if that has anything to do with recruitment for a new principal, or?
No, not really. I think, Pat, you can speak to this, but I think in part of it is the dean of student position, if memory serves me right. Is that correct,
Yeah,
Michelle?
it's the dean of students.
Yeah, and it wasn't in the budget last year, and so this picks it up after the approval went through. So it's almost like a housekeeping thing this year for us.
Okay.
Is that something that we should be considering as we recruit?
Wait, excuse me, Amy, I'm sorry. Let me call on Steve. Are you still? Is it specific to admin salaries?
It's all right, let her go.
Okay, go ahead. I didn't anticipate you were continuing to speak. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amy.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you very much. I just wanted to raise the question of whether that's something that should be considered in the budget for next year if we're recruiting for a new high school principal. Is the salary. This is the opportunity to increase it as we recruit for a new.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I think that, yes, that is in the back of our minds. Yes, I would say, Anne Marie and I've had multiple discussions on that very topic, Amy. I think you're absolutely right. And especially when we look at salaries of other high school principals in the area. I don't always feel that we are being as competitive as we could in that area. So I think that that is something that should be looked at. Thank you for bringing that up.
Steve, and then go ahead, Steve, and then I see Mr. Trustle's hand up. And if I've exhausted the questions from the committee, Dick, I will recognize you. But Steve, go right ahead.
Okay, I would like to go back to Attorney Gleason's comment about the SRO. And it leads into unfortunately or fortunately, into a bigger discussion on the normal duties and responsibilities of an SRO versus who is a uniformed police officer in the school. And I have an issue with that, which we can discuss at another time. But I just wanted to keep the idea of the position of the SRO and the MOU that accompanies that individual somewhat at the forefront of the committee as we move forward. It has nothing to do with numbers or anything else, but I just wanted to
Thank you.
that.
So I want to exercise my discretion as the chair and allow Richard Trussell to ask a question. Go right ahead, Dick.
Okay, thank you. You have $22,000 in there for the feasibility study or feasibility. When does the full effect of feasibility begin to hit us as a town? Meaning $1.5 million that you're doing in debt service, and what does that affect your budget, or is it outside your budget, or when will we as a town feel that impact? Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, I can start, and then Pat, if you can jump in. First of all, the feasibility study, we're still in the eligibility module as such right now of the MSBA. So we have to finish up our eligibility module first and have clearance from MSBA. They'll take a vote to say, yes, they are ready to go on to the feasibility study. But we don't know, as I sit here today, I don't know when that's going to happen. We have two more huge, for lack of a better term, dumps of information to MSBA at the end of this month. And so that goes through all of their legal and all kinds of other stuff. They'll probably give us some feedback in February to say, you know, we need changes here, we need more information about this out, and that could play out for a month or two. And then I'm hoping at that point in time that from there they would potentially put us to a vote. And if the MSBA votes to put us through, that they say, yes, they've done everything, then we could move into that feasibility study mode. But until that happens, I don't have a time frame right now. But Pat, you might want to speak to this because you'll speak more to the specificity, because I don't think you're going to feel it in this current year, Mr. Russell, if that was the question. Pat, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, and the borrowing that we would be doing is what they call a BAN, which is a bond anticipation note. And when we have to plan for it, because if it happens in next fiscal year, we need to have money set aside. So we've spoken to our financial advisor that advises us in regards to borrowing, and they recommended that we put that amount of money in for that amount of borrowing in the feasibility study. And based on the timelines, chances are it would occur in next year. Does that answer your question?
It does for me. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, Amy?
Yeah, just one more question. If someone could clarify why the library and media line item has decreased by $165,000. Does that mean we're eliminating the librarian position at the high school, or?
Pat, do you want to speak to you or Michelle about this? No, we are not, to my knowledge, we are not eliminating the library.
Let me just bring
Pat, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I'm bringing up my composite right now. Hold on. Michelle, do you have any detailed information? I don't see any on my summary here.
So that was based on last year when we had the unspecified cuts. We were able to identify some areas in each of the high schools.
Okay. That's what I thought it was.
We were able.
I thought so too.
Those cuts. So that shows an actual cost of those salaries in that area now. It doesn't anticipate any further cuts in that area. It's just a picture in time where we are right now.
Okay. Okay. Any questions specific to Luther Burbank, which starts on page 7? Seeing none. Any questions relative to Mary Rowlandson? That starts on page 9. Florence Sawyer, any questions? Mike?
This is actually not specific to Florence Sawyer. I've seen this across a lot of the schools. There has been an uptick in sorry, I can't find the line item now. Administrative assistant or classroom assistant assistants. And that seems, if I'm not mistaken, I did this last night, that seems to be across the schools, elementary, middle, and high schools. And I'm just wondering where that bump up has come from.
I can speak to that. So in previous years, we had a full day kindergarten offset for the kindergarten assistants for each of the classrooms. So we were able to offset those since we don't have those offsets in FY22 because we don't have the revolving fund for full day K. So that would be a big piece of it. Additionally, there might be some adjustment in the Title I classroom assistance for Lancaster schools.
Thank you.
Sawyer, other than that? Center School? And Hale. Okay, so at this point, there may be other questions that folks have. If you have additional questions, please raise your hand and then I will just do what I've been doing. So Joseph, Mike. Right, I'll come back and check. Joseph.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I'd like the superintendent to just speak on this. Finance committee member, Mr. Trussell from Lancaster brought this up, and it was also tangentially brought up at our building committee meeting by our select board member the other night. And there was some question regarding monies that have been spent in furtherance of the build project. So Superintendent Clenchey spoke to that and said that there had been no money spent to date as far as the feasibility study is concerned. So I'd like just Superintendent Clenchey just briefly speak on that. So once again, the word goes out where we're doing with the build project and how much we have not spent in regards to this project as of this date.
Right. To this point in time, for example, you're right, it does get back to Mr. Trussell's question. There has been no money spent right now of that $1.5 million. It hasn't even been borrowed. It's not even on our books. And you know, one thing that MSBA makes abundantly clear to us is do not get ahead of yourselves in the process, or they can eliminate us from the program. So it serves us no purpose to move faster than they want us to. So we are moving along exactly in the timeframes that they've asked us to move along in. And so we need to finish up this eligibility period first before we can even begin to be requesting to be on the docket for an MSBA vote. And then that MSBA vote has to happen. And then we go back and take a look at borrowing the money that we need for that feasibility study. So it's all right to this point in time, there's been no money spent on feasibility studies at all. And Pat, I think that you shared this already, but I think the 22,000 that we built into next year's budget was as a result of the guidance that we got from the person who guides us in that area. I don't think that we just came up with that number. Would that be right, Pat?
That's correct.
So to this point in time, there's been no money spent on feasibility studies at all. The money has not been borrowed.
Thank you. Mike?
Might I say one other thing too? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, this didn't come up the other night, but Pat and I spoke about it after the meeting when we did a debrief. Remember that there's still a huge amount of procurement process that's going to also have to happen with this. So, you know, there's a lot of process that still has to come. So now I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. So this workshop obviously looks very, very different than workshops in years past, where everyone kind of comes to the table, offers up their champagne request, as you put it. I really like that little metaphor. And then we slowly start to reduce those asks and trim the budget to where it lands. The only place where it felt like this year's workshop even marginally resembled the workshops of years past is when Joan offered up her, I think, 2 FTE requests. Was it an occupational therapist?
That's right.
Assistant. So I guess what I'm wondering is, what is the likelihood that those requests are going to survive the inevitable trimming of this budget?
So I think when it comes to special education, first of all, Joan is incredible, and I say this with all affection, Joan is incredibly astute when it comes to spending her budgets. Is that a nice way of saying it? I mean, she watches her budgets so closely, and she never has brought anything forward as a wish list. It's always compliance oriented.
Right.
And with the numbers that we're seeing, I do not see trimming those two positions out. When she comes and asks for it, it's never, she never presents a wish list, which is the way that her department runs is very different than how the schools run. So I see that those positions have to stay in there because we want to remain in compliance. It's far different than a request to have, you know, a dean of students at Florence Sawyer. That would be a lovely to have. I mean, I would love to give that to Joel, but this year it's not in the cards. But those two positions for SPED, I believe that we have to, unless there's a dramatic drop off of students that need that. But right now, that's not what we're seeing.
Right. Well, that makes total sense. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Other questions?
Kathy?
Who's
would you
that?
mind? It's
Wait.
Rich.
Oh, it helps to raise your hand, but yes, Rich, go ahead.
Well, I'd love if we started using the electronic hand raising feature, but it seems to be turned off in the Zoom here.
We could do that too sometime. That's a great idea. We actually did it at the building committee the other night.
Yeah, and the chat feature's turned off too. I'm not really sure why that is because we're all school committee and administrators here. But this is totally related to me. Alita, can you let my cell phone into the meeting because I have to drive my daughter to dance and I still want to participate?
It's 11 o'clock. If Rich, excuse me. I just wanted to express a concern that Rich is going to be participating via cell phone while he is driving. And we are at 11 o'clock. And so are there any other questions that anyone has? Oh, Mary, go ahead.
Not so much a question, but a
Yes.
Because I just want to thank everybody who has been part of this for how well put together this is. I think it's been said, and the streamlined process is much more in keeping with what I've experienced in other districts. Whereas the presentations by principals and department heads would go to the administration, would go to the superintendent. And then, you know, there would be some honing that would go on. And then the school committee would receive what we've received. I think this makes so much more sense than having all the principals and all the department chair people, with the exception that as Joan is here, when there is an ask, Joan, we'd love to have you here anytime you want to be, you know, with us, especially on a Saturday morning. But whenever there is an ask for something additional, it would make sense for that person to be with us. But other than that, this really worked well, in my opinion, and I hope that we would continue this.
Thank you so much, Mary. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Leah?
As so much is fluid right now, we have our budget hearing coming up, but I wonder, could we have another kind of spreadsheet given to us when more information becomes known?
We always do that, Leah. Like I say, we always do updates like almost every single school committee meeting moving forward. You'll see us do updates and we'll talk through those updates.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions? Joseph?
Madam Chairman, thank you. It's not really a question, just a comment, and I think we're wrapping this meeting up, so I'm going to take on the unofficial role of town crier here, or committee crier, and just reiterate that we have a public hearing on this budget scheduled, if my memory serves, March 3rd, Wednesday, March 3rd. So if anybody's listening, you're on notice. It will be posted, but you're on notice, March 3rd for public hearing. Thank you.
Yes, and I want to reiterate that it will be typically that it has been something that preceded a regular school committee meeting. But we are going, because we are still remote, we're going to have it as a standalone, and that'll allow for more time, and we won't have the pressure of, convening a regular meeting afterwards. So any other questions or comments? Amy?
Might you just clarify the next steps for me, because this is the first version of the proposed budget. We know that it's not going to meet what the towns are, or some towns, or one town maybe is asking for a budget increase. So like, I'm assuming that this is going to go through several iterations.
It does. And that, again, Amy, that's exactly why I said we keep the school committee apprised at every meeting going forward, and saying, in the broad strokes, okay, this is what we know. So for example, once we know the house numbers, we'll let you know the house numbers. You'll see them anyway because they'll be public, but we'll let you know how they are. They're specific to us. So, once we start to see the numbers come in, we'll start to clarify, and we let you know. And we've done that every year.
The only other thing, thank you for that explanation. The only other question I was mulling around as we seem to be wrapping up is whether there is or should be a contingency line item for COVID or something like that. I mean, maybe it's built into every line item.
No, and that's such a good question. I will tell you this: when we started the budget, we actually had a line in there for $500,000, as Pat, if memory serves me right, that we ultimately cut. But your thinking is, from my lens, spot on, and I think a responsible thing to do. And again, we may come back and add something in for COVID as we're watching. I think we looked and thought, okay, we're hoping that a stimulus package will come through and help us to offset that, which is why we took that 500,000 out. But having said that, we may find ourselves in another couple of weeks saying, no, we got to put something back in there. Great question.
Steve?
Yes, I would just like to comment that I think this is a much more efficient way of dealing with this, rather than having us sit for 4 hours on a Saturday morning listening to everybody's wish list. That's number one. Number two, I think it's important for us to remember that while we are trying to meet certain financial levels of increase in allocation from the previous year, it just may not be possible to do that unless we want the budget to actually not just cut as close to the bone, but actually take some of the bones out of it, which would, because of the way the budget is built, and knowing the high percentage of our budget that is personnel, it would mean personnel cuts, and it would mean larger classes in some places, and it just has to be remembered by the folks who are watching this, who are not actually participating, but maybe watching this through the live streaming of this. This is, we're going to land where we're going to land, and we're trying to keep the same services. We may not be able to make a 2% increase, either across the board or for any specific town. We have to be realistic. Expenses have gone up. Teacher salaries are going to be impacted even without any cost of living, if that's the way ultimately it's negotiated. But the steps in the lane increases will mean increases in the personnel line. And we have to be realistic about it. This is what it is. And whether it's good or not, whether people like it or not, we're doing the best we can. And I know that the administration is angsting over every dollar. And we just have to understand that we're not, we're doing the best. The school district is doing the best that it can to provide the educational level that parents demand and to provide the facilities that the children need. It's all for the children ultimately. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Steve. Any other comments? Well, I'm going to commend the committee for staying on task and focused. And whenever we set parameters around a meeting, I get a little itchy, but you guys did a great job. It is 11:09, and I would happily entertain a motion to adjourn if there are no objections.
So moved, Madam Chairman.
Joseph made the motion, second?
Second.
Steve. So I will call the roll. Leah?
Yes.
And Elaine?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Sharon?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Joseph?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Brett?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And Kathy? Yes. We are adjourned. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you. We'll all see each